So next up, we have a presentation from two speakers, Kathleen King and Dr. Siobhán Kelleher. And Kathleen and Siobhán are going to talk to us about their experience of doing PPI in endometriosis research. And this is a medical condition related to the lining of the uterus. So over to Kathleen now, who's going to start the presentation. Will be joined by Siobhán.
Hi everybody. I would normally start something like this with a show of hands as to who's heard of endometriosis and who hasn't, but it's a little bit more difficult when we do this virtually. Do you know that there's 155,000 women in Ireland living with endometriosis and up to 200 million living with the condition worldwide? My name is Kathleen King. I'm the chair of the Endometriosis Association of Ireland, and I work as a medical scientist in Letterkenny University Hospital here in Donegal. My own endometriosis background started a long time ago when I was 12. For my very first period, I experienced quite debilitating symptoms. I self-diagnosed from a home medical text at the age of 14, but it took me 9 years to convince multiple GPs that I wasn't lying, that I wasn't making it up, and coincidentally 9 years is the average delay in diagnosis in Ireland. I got a self-referral out of the state, and within a couple of weeks was diagnosed by a gynecologist. So within weeks of my diagnosis, I got in touch with Endometriosis UK and also the Endometriosis Association of Ireland. I began educating and supporting women online straight away through different fora, and the rest, to say, is history. Like over 20 years now, volunteering in the sector, educating, supporting, and also spreading awareness.
How early should you involve patients in medical device research and development, or how would you even go about doing that? My name is Dr. Siobhán Kelleher, and I'm a researcher based in the Translational Medical Device Lab here in NUI Galway. And I'm going to tell you about my journey to answer those questions. So, how did I get here? Well, I'm a scientist. I did a master's in cell biology and a PhD in pharmacology many years ago in UCD. I left university and then I moved into industry, and I spent 15 years there in different clinical and commercial roles in lots of multinationals like Icon Clinical Research, Wyeth, Novartis, and MSD. 5 years ago, I actually left industry and I moved to Galway to do a BioInnovate fellowship. And it was there that I met my research partner, Sinead Hughes. Sinead is an engineer with 10 years experience in medical device research and development. So the area where we identified an awful lot of unmet clinical needs is endometriosis. We both have family and friends who have this disease. So we applied for funding from Enterprise Ireland, and we were successful in getting some funding to develop a non-hormonal treatment for endometriosis. And more recently, we received funding from Science Foundation Ireland to develop a device which would allow easier and quicker diagnosis of the disease.
As an individual living with a chronic condition and also as a scientist, I love the idea of collaboration and direct involvement of patient groups. For too long, I've read journal articles where I've screamed at the screen saying, look, if only they would have asked the patients. Now, I won't elaborate on some of the horror stories of endometriosis research, but let's just say that papers that rank the beauty of endometriosis women, that comment on their tight clothing, and also the quality of sex life of their male partners are usually not well received. They all would have benefited from PPI. By speaking directly to the end user, and in this case, it's the patients and their representatives, it allows research to be guided into areas of real need. Being an endometriosis advocate carries a huge amount of responsibility, and this is one that is echoed in the constitution of the EAI. We have an obligation to support research, and not only to encourage it, but to engage with it. And what better way to do this than to sit down right at the very beginning and help the research team listen in.
Sinead and I were eager to involve patients in our research and development from the very beginning. We realised that endometriosis is an individual disease and that symptoms vary widely across patients. And we wanted to know more about the lived experience of those women with the disease here in Ireland and also in other countries across the globe. So how are we going to do that? So initially I thought, let's do a survey. And that's when I realised that I'd fallen into the trap. And that's the trap of patient participation or patient engagement, but not true patient involvement. It wasn't until I attended a PPI Ignite workshop that I realised I needed to take a step back and that I needed to decide with patients what our research question would be and then how best to address that.
When I spoke to Siobhán and Sinead, moments into the call, I knew that we had found a research partnership. We organised a meeting amongst a core group, quite diverse, all different ages and stages and backgrounds around endometriosis. And we knew that they would be keen to assist. They were delighted to be involved. Follow our initial meetings and subsequent presentation at our information day last November, Siobhán and Sinead made such a positive impact on our membership, and we received excellent feedback, especially around their honesty, their expectations for their research, and also their passion for the topic. We thought it was a great opportunity for them to demonstrate that research is not something that happens overnight. And it certainly helped ground the expectations of our members, but it also helped to show as well that there is somebody out there who is willing to help and who's willing to look at this, and that was very much appreciated.
It started with an informal chat. Kathleen was very open to exploring how we might work together. And this time last year, Sinead and I took a road trip to Letterkenny to meet Kathleen and a group of women she had convened from the Endometriosis Association of Ireland. And it was just a brilliant meeting. We were humbled by the stories that these women told us and by their honesty and openness for what can be a very personal experience given the nature of the condition. So as Kathleen has mentioned, we had a variety of women present. They were at different stages in their disease progression. They were from different geographies, and they had accessed different treatments and had different experiences in the health service. And let's not forget, we also had one man, a partner of somebody who's living with endometriosis, and it was just so valuable to be able to learn that perspective as well. So this group agreed to form a research team with us, and we looked at the questions we wanted to address, and it transpired that a survey was the way to go. So we together designed a survey and then circulated it.
The benefits of PPI are wide-ranging. For us at the EAI, it helps to give greater exposure to endometriosis. Despite being such a common condition, endometriosis that affects 1 in 10 women, most people have not heard of it, and those who have often have a lot of misinformation. It benefits our members and those living with endometriosis worldwide, as they often feel a sense of inclusion and support in what is often an isolating journey. Here we have somebody who wants to listen, who wants to be involved, and who actually gets it. We're so used to being fobbed off, we're so used to not being believed, but yet here's a team of researchers willing to look into endometriosis, and it goes some way towards validating the pain and suffering that we experience. And while the EAI is a small charity, it is hoped that one day we'll be able to secure some funding to promote research. Our links with the research team here today can help bring the reality of research to our community.
There are so many benefits. Firstly, the quality of the research is much higher. Working together means that we ask the right questions the right way. Responses to the survey has just been phenomenal. We had over 2,000 responses from women living with endometriosis globally. And this is partly because of Kathleen's established relationships with patient organisations in other countries, and partly because of the efforts of the research team to circulate the post on social media. Now we're looking at everybody's busy calendars to find a date to discuss the results and the findings. But more than that, Sinead and I have found it hugely motivating to be part of this research team. When you have those days when nothing seems to be going right, you start to wonder, how did I end up here? And it's at those times when you talk to any of these women with endometriosis that everything is put into perspective, and you remember why you started out in this journey and how much you want to make a difference to these women's lives.
My initial reaction was, nope, there's no downsides at all. But I suppose for a very small charity like ourselves, we are living with chronic conditions. We are volunteer-led. I work very long hours in the hospital. So if you're time poor, it can be quite difficult to maybe keep up with some of the demands of the research team. I have to say, though, that working with Siobhán and Sinead has been absolutely brilliant. They've been very understanding about that. But I think it's important that you've got good cooperation, good open dialogue, and trust between the patient team and the research team.
In terms of challenges, there's resource and time constraints on both sides. For us, our funding is dependent on meeting milestones. For Kathleen, she's leading a voluntary organisation, and she's supporting not only our research, but other groups' research here in Ireland and indeed abroad. And for the research team, they're managing their disease and they're also juggling family and work commitments. And on top of that, we are adding research. So Sinead and I really appreciate all the time, work and effort that Kathleen and the research team give to us.
So I can see our partnership progressing well into the future. Our members trust Siobhán and Sinead as part of our research team, and we've grown a strong bond in only such a short space of time. We've not only given hope to our members, but also a huge sense of pride that in Ireland, and especially Galway, research has been done into endometriosis, and I think that in itself is worth its weight in gold. I have felt through engagement with the research team that we will see the profile of endometriosis raised. Our members can help guide and form research and progress in this field, and it may help lift the assumption that patients are simply patients. We need to remember that a lot of those living with chronic conditions are scientists like myself, they're medical professionals, they're researchers, they've got a wide and varied skill base that can bring different things to the table and help enhance that PPI relationship as well.
As I mentioned earlier, we would like to involve patients along the entire development path, and it's quite a long path. It takes on average 7 years to bring a medical device to market, and we want to involve patients in designing our prototype and in designing clinical studies to ensure that we include relevant endpoints for them. But I think we can see that MedTech is actually evolving and moving in the direction of patient involvement. The FDA and the European Medicines Agency now include patients in their regulatory decision making, and we can see that patients are now involved in health technology assessments too, when new medicines or medical devices are being introduced to the market.
Absolutely would recommend it. I think it's an essential requirement in all research, to be honest. Grants should not be awarded to any group who is not engaged in a meaningful way with their target focus group. And this needs to be more than an email or a circular, or to say, look, well, we've contacted the patient organisation. It needs to be meaningful. It needs to be face to face. There needs to be trust. There needs to be honesty. There needs to be integrity there, and I think that's very important. Formalising PPI gives it really good structure, protection and assurance on both sides that this is a formal and a recognised process. So to any researchers or advocates out there who are considering it, go for it. You never know who's hiding in the hills just waiting to be asked. Thank you.
definitely advocate for more PPI in MedTech. I think if I was to give any words of advice, it would be around setting expectations. Firstly, setting your own expectations, because PPI is very different to patient participation or patient engagement. It requires a lot more time and effort, but that time and effort is what generates those genuine partnerships. And secondly, it's around setting your partner's expectations, to be very open and honest from day one. We were very conscious that we were talking and working with women who are desperately looking for new treatments and new ways to diagnose disease. We're at the very early stages in terms of a proof of concept, and it will take many more years before we will have a device that would be available on the market. And so it was very important that we managed those expectations and didn't raise hopes about a device being available in the immediate future. Most of all, I would say that for anybody in MedTech who's engaging in research, it's never too early to start PPI. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen and Siobhán. A very powerful presentation. Well done. Lots of comments coming in here about how they really liked the partnership, the double presentation. And I think for me, it really shows the partnership approach that you have taken in your research, even to be here today as a partnership. And my first question is for Kathleen. You talked about within moments on the phone call to Siobhán and Sinead that you knew it was going to be a good presentation. What do you think are the qualities of a good partnership for PPI in research?
I think one of the most important things is the honesty, the trust, and managing expectations. And that's something that Siobhán and Sinead were very clear with at the very beginning. For me, I was very excited to hear that there was going to be any research, and I would love to have, an adequate treatment and a really short diagnostic process in the morning. But I also know that that's not realistic. So I think their expectations and they laid out their path very clearly for us at the very beginning, and I think that's very important. I think that honesty is a huge thing.
Great. And Siobhán, we have a question in there. Well, actually, for both of you, you might be interested that there's some comments around your message being so powerful that patients are not just patients. But Siobhán, there's a question here that is posed that says, would you say the distinction between patients, public contributors and researchers is often too simplistic? In other words, people are more and bring more than their lived experience. They can bring, their lived experience plus their research experience plus their professional skills, as you have shown today. Would you like to make a comment about that or have anything to say about that?
Yes, I think it's very important to consider the person as the whole person, not just as a person living with a disease, but actually, how that person interacts not with their disease, with their family, with society, and what they can contribute to the wider society as well in research participation.
And you both talked about managing expectations. To you first, Kathleen, what would you say, what advice would you give anybody in terms of managing expectations at the start of a partnership?
Yeah, I think at the start of the partnership, it's very important to lay out maybe the roadmap for the research and maybe to explain to the patient groups as well how the actual process of research works. A lot of us read about sensational headlines in the newspapers, but we may not necessarily know the process behind that. So I think laying out the pathway for research, explaining that it may take 7 years to take a device to market, explaining how the different steps work, because again, often as consumers, we're reading the end product. We don't necessarily know those very basic and tentative steps at the beginning. And we often don't realise too that a lot of research going on in the background may not come to fruition, as in bringing about a product or a drug, but the learning that comes along as part of that is often used then in other parts as well. So I think the pathway is important.
And for you, Siobhán, managing expectations?
Yeah, I think that's so important from the very beginning. And I guess for us, as I mentioned in the video, it was the fact that we were going to this group very early and we were still at proof of concept stage, and we didn't want to raise hopes when we knew it would take many more years to make a device and bring it to the market. Also, we wanted to set up a way and a dialogue and a way of working that was very open and transparent. And doing that as researchers based in the college meant that we had to explain that there were certain things we could share with the research team and certain things we couldn't, because it constituted intellectual property for the college. And I would have to say that the research team were very understanding about that. And then finally, in terms of we shared what our aspirations were out of this research. So for Sinead and I, if this proof of concept works, we hope to spin this research and the license out of the college to form a company to commercialize the medical devices. And we want to be very honest and open about that, because it might change how some people feel about the research, and we want people to know that was our intention from the very beginning. So yes, I think it's very important to set those expectations.
That's great. Listen, there's so much there. We could spend a whole next hour talking about some of those expectations and the next steps. We are at 11:52, and I'm conscious that people need a motion break now. So thank you to Siobhán. Thank you to Kathleen for a wonderful partnership in presentation. Thank you to Anne, our previous presenter, and thank you all for joining us this morning. We are going to take a short break now up until 12 o'clock, just to give us an opportunity to stretch, a bit of a comfort break. We will resume at 12 o'clock, at which case Dr. Patrick Murphy will be chairing the next session. So thank you all, and I wish you all the very best of luck in your research in the future.